Break's over. Recruit Dat Boot is back from our extended holiday and winter break on the heels of the football season. I'm Jarrett Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman. And we have obviously a lot to catch up on, and it's probably going to ultimately take multiple episodes to kind of catch up on everything that's going on right now, everything that's happened for the past month. But we're going to get to some of the major points, certainly in this episode, and try and play some of that catch up, including LSU's fantastic winter in the transfer portal and some of the other keynotes of some top Louisiana guys and updates on them. But Sam, how are you doing overall, man? Getting back to it, smiling through the stress of, starting a new year and diving more fully into a new recruiting cycle.
Yeah, it's exciting. Technically the 2025 cycle has a couple more days left, but it definitely feels like with the new year comes a changing of the guard. These 2026s that we've spent a lot of time analyzing and getting to know and getting more familiar with over the past couple of months are now at the forefront. That brings a whole, a fresh slate of new recruiting intel, recruiting trends, which teams are really making a run. In terms of Louisiana, which guys are LSU guys, which guys are getting courted by the A&Ms and Alabamas and Georgias of the world. And at the same time, while we're in the heat of the season, it's so fun. One of the best parts, as is learning and hearing about new guys and putting them on your radar. Now's a great time to kind of recollect your focus, get a look at those guys, get a look at some more guys that maybe never popped on the radar and see where they fit in, and get you excited for starting all fresh with camps and 7-on-7 and a whole off season before we really start diving into this full throttle.
We're going to start ramping into some of those tidbits on some of these guys here shortly. And obviously we'll be back on more of our weekly schedule through the course of this year. And I mean, some really exciting classes coming through the state of Louisiana right now. But Sam, I told you I wanted to, before we go fully into all the football stuff, I wanted to give you a chance to share thoughts that you might have on the way that we started this year off the field with obviously tragedy that, just because we weren't recording at the time, I didn't want it to be something we overlooked entirely, because it's something that affected us as it affected a lot of people, even beyond, the tragedy itself on New Year's Day. But the attack on New Orleans over the night of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, obviously a couple of former LHSA athletes, including a young man, Tiger Besh, that we both had a chance to cover, a key piece of St. Thomas More as they ascended to be the St. Thomas More that we have now watched compete for championships year in and year out, and super close with his younger brother, Jack, through his recruiting process in LSU and TCU and everything. And so that one in particular, that's something that hit really close to home for us, as not just two people that care very much about New Orleans, me growing up there, and then you that becoming kind of, your and your wife's home as you grew up into full-fledged adults. But I mean, just New Orleans and the Besh family, and I had a chance to mention some things on the first episode of Podnas of the new year, but wanted to give you a chance to kind of share some thoughts before we talk about obviously less important things and the recruiting trail.
Well, I appreciate you even referring to me as an adult. That's the first victory I've gotten all week. Man, you first of all, when you were so right about the way that I picture New Orleans in my mind, I lived in Austin for almost 2 years, and I still refer to the 504 as home. It was raining today, and I left Allison a message, and I'm like, hey, it's raining here in NOLA, and I'm like, I'm in Southwest Austin, nowhere close to New Orleans, but to wake up on January 1st and find out what had happened in the city was traumatic. It's one of the few times that I've really had no words to say, because of how much I love that city, how the national audience views that city without really ever having to step foot and getting to be immersed in the culture and the people, and just the incredibleness of that city. It's my favorite city in the world, and it gets a terrible rap for whatever reason. And then when something terrible like a terrorist attack happens, It obviously brings the attention to the negative side of things, but um, you know, exchanging some messages with people I know back in the city. For a couple of minutes, it seemed like most people, at least that I knew, were able to get home in time, or stay out of the action, until we found out about Tiger. Which not only Tiger, Jack, Michelle, his mother. I just felt like during Jack's recruitment, I got so close with not only Jack but Tiger and his mom. I remember Jack coming down during COVID to train in New Orleans, and I met Tiger a bunch of times. He introduced me as the big brother and the protector. We had a big laugh about it right when I met him. Um, Knowing Jack and all the things that he's already been through in his life, it's hard to say that he's ready for this sort of moment. No one could possibly be ready for this. But I know that he's going to channel it and use it to keep ascending in his life. He's obviously playing in the Senior Bowl coming up in the next couple of days. Just knowing the quality of young man this is, the incredible athlete that Jack is, and the adversity that he's had to stomach through his entire life, including as he gets ready for this critical moment in his professional career. It's super saddening. My thoughts and prayers are with the Betch family, and we've all had a chance to speak to Michelle in some facet or the other, and nothing that anyone can say can really make anything better. When you lose someone in that fashion, you want to say that only time can heal it, but that sometimes doesn't even do the trick. It's extremely upsetting. It's extremely sad for the family. But they should know that they have so much support from the people around them. And, I can really speak for Jack, but I can also speak for Tiger in this. And both of those young men inspired so much happiness to the people that got to know them. And as tough of a loss as it is, we're all smiling up at Tiger right now and rooting for his little brother the same way that he would be as he prepares for these moments. And hopefully with some success for Jack, it makes it a little bit easier to get over this horrible event.
Yeah. Obviously the most serious moment that we've had in almost year of doing this, but you mentioned some aspects of it, and I think we kind of feel like and often get looked to as people that kind of have words to share, whether it be for the highs of some exciting athletics accomplishments, or just at any point, both professionally and within our families. And that's something that I know I've struggled with, is not knowing that nothing I could say is going to really be of help to a situation. But I did, texting with the Beshes, and I think it's important that we continue to mention that we're consistently thinking about Tiger and thinking about the family and just sharing love. And so I'm glad we had a moment to kind of to share for them again. And if folks didn't get a chance to see the feature on Tiger that was played before the national championship game last week, definitely check that out. ESPN and Marty Smith and those guys did a really good job of kind of sharing the light that Tiger was and will continue to be for Jack and for the family and for everyone that he crossed paths with. But kind of clumsily transitioning now into the sports topics to get into this year. I mentioned obviously this winter was huge for LSU on the recruiting trail, particularly in the transfer portal, to continue filling out their 2025 haul. And we're not going to go deeply into all 16 of the guys. Hopefully folks have had a chance to kind of keep up with some of it through the weeks that this is all broken down. But just overall, how big was the past month and a half for the Tigers since the last time we had a chance to chat, in terms of the guys with some college experience that they were able to add to this roster now heading into the new year?
Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me, but I do know the positions, and they're positions that you and I spoke about over the course of the fall. We're talking, Brian Kelly brought in some new coaches and coordinators before last season, including Blake Baker on the defensive side of the ball, Bo Davis to revamp the defensive line, Corey Raymond to overlook the secondary, and a couple of more coaches here and there. But they were still getting the roster to where they needed it to be. And You saw it on the recruiting trail, some of the big gets, some of the big commitments that they were able to eventually sign. But with the transfer portal, they were able to go get those position groups and completely revamp them and get players that have college experience that can be the elder statesmen on this team. So there's not as much pressure on the Dom McKinley going into his second season at LSU, or the freshman D-line group coming in to have to play critical roles. Now it's more on a college timeline for the Zion Williams out of Lufkin, who's a big body, can come in and get himself in shape, get him acclimated to potentially be a rotational player, as opposed to now Jack Pyburn being on that defensive line, the guy who I think he had double-digit sacks for Florida in a third down role last year, now is going to be able to work for Blake Baker and Kevin Peoples off the edge, force some pressure. And that was a part of the LSU roster that was completely lacking last year. It didn't look like a typical LSU team, especially one coached by Blake Baker, who loves pressure and being aggressive and making the quarterback have to make the decisions for themselves and give the chance. It just didn't look like that from the defensive front. So they devoted obviously a lot of bodies to the defensive front. The same thing goes on the offensive line. They're going to lose Will Campbell and Emory Jones, 2 first-round picks that are going to be playing in the NFL on Sundays in a couple of weeks, couple of months rather. And then Corey Raymond going to get his guys for the secondary. I think for several years we've been saying this LSU secondary doesn't exactly look like an LSU secondary. They brought Corey Raymond back, and with that, the roster has been reshaped in a big way. He went into Florida to get some of the guys that he recruited in Gainesville, obviously holding on to DJ Pickett, a 5-star freakazoid who is now going to line up at corner and give Corey Raymond his new Greedy Williams. I think that after last year, although LSU was competitive, not competitive enough to obviously compete for a playoff spot or win out for play in the SEC championship. I think with these pieces, with a returning Harold Perkins, with a returning Garrett Nussmeier, the leading passer in the SEC, if I'm correct, probably not. But the returning quarterback who's been through it all, and these pieces around him, this is a type of LSU team that you would expect to be competing in the SEC next year. And with 12 playoff spots, you think would have a short track to getting back into the playoffs in the mix for a natty.
That's kind of where I'm at with a lot of this. Is coming out of signing day for the high school guys, I felt like LSU had brought in a high school haul that positioned them well for this year as well as for the years to come, if they could find those right pieces in the transfer portal to really put them over the edge and be a true playoff contender. And I think that's absolutely where they've landed now is the expectation will be to get into that 12-team bracket at, I don't know if at the very least is fair to say, but at the least they expect to be in that number, if not, expecting to compete for SEC championship and all of those things, compete for, the big trophy at the end of all this with some of these guys that they feel like they can kind of plug and play in positions of need. And you mentioned the trenches huge, the secondary huge, a receiving core that I think brings back some good talent, adds some nice shots in its arm there, with Barrion Brown from Kentucky, Nick Anderson potentially from Oklahoma if he's back healthy and able to reach some of what we saw from him early in his career. And so I think super encouraging for a team that we saw. Blake Baker, I thought you saw some of the elements of what they wanted to do, some progress toward where he wants to be, but not necessarily as havoc wreaking as they would like to be. Same sort of thing with that secondary and some of the depth on the defensive line and whatnot, that I thought they were good, but not necessarily what you expect from an LSU team, particularly in those position groups. And so now suddenly you've got some pieces and you're ready to take that next step when you were, a ranked team for a big chunk of this year and really competitive. Even in the games you lost, they just kind of got away from you late. And now you have a heck of an influx of some young talent, as well as a heck of an influx of some proven talent, with a lot of these guys proven at the SEC level, proven at the ACC level, and, in really notable ways. So should be a really big 2025 this fall.
They found themselves some proven playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, and on offense, I thought they injected that offense with so much speed not only do you return Nussmeier, you have Caden Durham now taking the reins in the backfield. We know that Caden, coming out of Duncanville, was one of the fastest players in the 2024 class out of the DFW area. Obviously, he had a sensational freshman season. And
on
now,
on a foot injury that people forget, because he was so good when we saw him on the field as a freshman. He was dealing with a foot injury that whole time, and now you get him as a sophomore and healthy and all of those things.
a healthy sophomore paired with Harlem Berry and JT Lindsay behind him. And then on the receiving core, obviously, you lose Kyron Lacey. That's a whole other story. To return Aaron Anderson after his breakout season, Chris Hilton, when finally healthy, obviously injuries have plagued him for so long at LSU. When healthy, really stood up to the test. And now with those guys returning, you pair that with Barry and Brown, who was one of the fastest kids in his respective recruiting class before signing with Kentucky, and Nick Anderson, who is a true perimeter wide receiver. Take all the pressure off of Chris Hilton and Aaron Anderson and Brown, and you are 4 deep with guys that are going to play in the NFL one day, with a proven quarterback who has some weapons behind him in the backfield. I actually think this offense has the potential to be even better next year. Not to mention, the biggest issue for Garrett Nussmeier, of course, was the turnovers, and that's only going to come with more experience and more time under his belt.
Just need to watch and see how the offensive line comes together. And that's where, I mean, guys like Braylon Moore, Josh Thompson are huge to come in and give you some veteran leadership in there. They have some guys in that room already that they like a lot, hoping to take that next step, replacing obviously big shoes to fill from some veterans on that offensive line this year, but an offensive line that had its issues at times, particularly establishing themselves in the running game. And I think that's areas where these new additions in the transfer portal too kind of hang their hat a little bit. So will be fun to watch how this group comes together throughout the spring and summer workouts and fall camp before they kick things off up at Clemson this year. But it's a team that looks like it's got a chance to be in that national conversation where LSU fans realistically or not expect them to be every single year. This team looks like it's got a shot. Talking about some of the Louisiana guys, again, too much happens too quickly for us to get into all of it when we take a break here like we did this winter. But a couple of major storylines we did want to hit on. One, while we were away, Deshaun Ford, a guy that had SEC offers at one point in his recruiting process, I think had been all over the map, from potentially the expectations being a little bit too high at points to then becoming undervalued, in my opinion, down the stretch. Ends up announcing on an all-star game that he's going to sign with ULM. And I think ULM fans were just shocked that they got to have that moment of an all-America game where a guy is announcing he's going to the Warhawks. But when you look at Deshaun Ford and where he is as a player right now, I mean, a brute force running back in a lot of ways for that Tigers team that helped lift them to history as a junior. What are your expectations for what he can bring to that program up in Monroe?
Yeah, I think when we started the podcast and we were talking about this immaculate 2025 recruiting class with the 5 or 6 Power 5 running backs potentially in Louisiana, Deshaun Ford was at the top of our mind after leading Opelousas to a state championship, and nobody could tackle this kid en route to the end zone multiple times. He was a top performer for the 2023 state championships, if I'm getting my dates correct.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Florida, so a lot of SEC schools were interested. Where Deshaun Ford going to ULM, most people I think would kind of like side look at that. He's as a running back in the year of 2025, he's kind of a one-trick pony. He's a bulldozer, and he's a very talented bulldozer. Obviously, he lacks that top-end speed, but he brings that physical presence out of the backfield. I think if he were to play linebacker, he would probably have more power for interest, but he's going to go to ULM. I think he's going to be able to carry the workload in the ULM backfield. First of all, it's a great get for ULM, keeping him in the state. Schools like Tulsa, La Tech, and Central Arkansas were all trying to bring him out of Louisiana. Not La Tech, obviously. But going there, I wonder if he's going to catch a couple more eyes, because he's a very good player. Yeah, he might be just that bulldozer, that short yardage back, but he's obviously capable of ripping off big runs. Obviously, he isn't Saquon Barkley, but when you watch a big 230-pound back rip off 60-yard runs one after the other, And you have to wonder if he finds some success at ULM, could it open the door for him to potentially transfer in a year or so? And if not, I love it because he gets to play running back. He had the choice to play different positions. He's stuck with what he loves and what he's passionate about. He's very good at running back. He doesn't have, power forward top end speed, but he's going to go to ULM. And I think that might be the right level for him to have a ton of success and maybe open some more eyes along the way.
Yeah, he might not be clocking what some of the other members of this grade 25 class of running backs were clocking in terms of top end speed. He might not have some of the wiggle of some of these guys, and not as polished of a pass catcher as a Nate Shepard or James Simon or Harlan Berry or some of the guys. But when he had a lane for Opelousas, he was gone in a hurry, and he racked up 4,000 yards the past couple of years combined, and has really worked his tail off to try to round out his game as much as he can, try to get involved in some 7-on-7 and all those things, and showcase some things and fine tune some things that he wasn't necessarily able to do as much for his high school team. And he's a kid too that I have absolutely loved anytime we have a chance to chat with him. Just a great kid who is going to work his butt off and focus on the right things and be a high character guy. And so I think his hard-nosed mentality, high character, and what he brings to the table is going to fit in really well with that program that Coach Vincent has been building up there, and kind of where they hung their hat this year as a team that could run the football and stop folks on defense. And now, we talked before the break, you frustrating the Louisiana Tech fans with saying Dejon Smith is potentially on his way to a Power 4 after 1 year, and now you're telling the ULM fans right down I-20, look, Deshaun could end up going someplace else. But I think credit also to, we gave ULM a little bit of hell after the early signing period of not landing Louisiana guys, and
Right.
I think while we'd love to see more Louisiana talent going to Monroe, this is a really nice one. So congrats to those guys, and we see you.
We're not hating on ULM or La Tech. We are applauding them for getting Dejon. We're applauding them for getting Deshaun. I'm just saying it's college football. Whether you're ULM or LSU, it's hard to hold on to retain your players.
No doubt.
Especially when they're really good.
Of course, we're not hating on him. And I spent a good 2.5 years up there for the New Star and loved my time. Look back on it even more fondly than I enjoyed it at the time that we were up there with our good crew up there. But one that I thought about as we were talking about Deshaun, and I should have included on the original list, but I know you'll be prepared for it. Xavier Ford is now heading to Minnesota. Not a pipeline that we typically see, Louisiana to Minnesota. They've had some guys that they've signed in the past, but it's been a few years. And another absolutely prolific high school running back in Louisiana for the Wampus Cats. He set a state record this year with his single season yardage up over 33 or 3,400. I don't remember the exact number, but Xavier Ford, Michael Ford's little nephew, I say little, he's pretty physical in his own right, is now heading to the Golden Gophers in another, probably didn't go the way that some folks in the area necessarily would have expected recruitment. But what does Minnesota get in Xavier as he brings another one of Louisiana's top 2025 running backs to their program?
Yeah, Xavier is a little bit of a workhorse in the same right. We know he's been able to handle the workload for his time in high school, but beyond that, I actually think he's a pretty decent 3-down running back. I think he's got some wiggle to him. He's got some speed and he's got toughness. To me personally, I knew he was a Power 4 running back. I thought it was going to be a steal for Coach Summerall and Tulane. They obviously were the front runner for a good chunk of the fall. But I'm not surprised to see him chase his dreams to go Power 4. I think Minnesota has quietly found some good backs in the DFW area in the past, and getting Xavier Ford he's a hidden gem. I don't exactly know why. I'm assuming it's more of in the classroom is some things he had to work out. But I'm extremely happy that he was able to kind of find a spot, and again, not to keep ringing the same bell, but if he has some success over in Big Ten country, it's gonna, he's a Louisiana kid, and people are gonna recruit him to come back home. Schools like Ole Miss and LSU and Texas A&M love to recruit Louisiana talent and bring them closer to home. But it's just a whole different world these days when all you need to do is find your first spot, and if it makes sense and put you in a position, it'll lead you to your next spot. And it's not a negative. It's just the way that college football has worked. And Xavier making it to Power Four is extremely commendable. Kind of certainly in his skill set for sure. And now he's going to hopefully make the most of those opportunities up there.
It pained me so much for a stretch to tell parents or kids essentially, the transfer portal will be an option. If you're stressing about what the options are right now, you can go kind of prove yourself. I historically never wanted to tell a kid or a family, go into this situation, sign your letter of intent with the mindset of, hey, I can transfer at some point. You should go somewhere, be committed to it, and try to make it work to the best of your ability at that spot. But the way that college football and college athletics as a whole have continued to develop, it really has become a lot of get your foot in that game somewhere, find your spot, whatever it may be. It may not be what you hoped it would be coming out of high school, but there is a fluidity now to it that, for better or worse, I mean, for better, I think it's right for the kids to have a level of flexibility there, not be hamstrung just because they are athletes in addition to students. And for worse, the challenges of building your roster, it becomes a bit much to keep up with year round. But yeah, I mean, get somewhere you feel good about to start out, and maybe it works out great there, or maybe it is, a step to whatever that next step is. I think we have now a couple of guys to talk about that you maybe won't allude to. Okay, well, this could be a 1 year there and then transfer, because we have a couple of guys that are clearly SEC guys right out of the gates, and one right here, down the street from me, Lamar Brown at U High, top prospect in the state for 2026, is someone that, as much as we've watched guys through the years be multi-position guys, two-way guys, there haven't been a lot that we have talked about as much in terms of the high potential in multiple places as Lamar Brown, who is realistically a power four guy on either side of the line of scrimmage. And you wrote a story after his recent opportunity to visit with Tulane, where they told him, man, come be the Travis Hunter of the trenches down here uptown. We'll let you do both. Talk me through that conversation with Lamar and just kind of what the latest is with him and the way that he's kind of weighing some of these factors and opportunities.
Yeah. Lamar, as great of a player as he is, people have differentiating opinions on what position he'll play at the next level. I imagine we'll get some clarity on that depending on how, camp season goes. Cause he's an All-American. He's going to want to camp at either the Under Armour or Rivals camp or whatever camps come this spring and summer. I know that he wants to prove that he's a top 20 player in the country right now. We have him as a number one interior offensive lineman, but obviously if he ends up at a school like Texas A&M, which has a ton of momentum, they like him at the defensive line, and they think that he's the number one defensive tackle in the country. And, Mike Elko knows a little thing about defensive line, so it's hard to really argue with him. Though, having known Lamar, I personally think most of his upside is at guard. He's a fantastic multi-sport athlete with incredible athletic traits to be able to move and block in space. He bends extraordinarily well. And I think for a majority of his time at U High, most of his best work has come playing the offensive line. That's not to say that he couldn't devote his time and energy to defensive line and continue to excel in that area. Tulane offering that it's interesting for two reasons. One, if there was any school where Lamar could go play both sides of the ball, I would say it would be at Tulane's level, because in that conference, it's not a Power Four conference, even though the competition is very stiff. It's a lot to ask of a Power Four offensive or defensive lineman to play both ways. A lot of coaches that saw that article or saw that graphic have reached out and they're like, that's not possible, man. Like he can't, his body would break down. We're talking about Travis Hunter, played more snaps than anyone in college football last year, running up and down the field and then covering those same guys. And still likely he'll play one position in the NFL, maybe two or three if you count special teams. So while I think it was a great visit for Lamar, I think it was great that he went there with his teammates really to get them some exposure and get them the love from Coach Summerall and that incredible Tulane staff. And this week he'll head to LSU. LSU is a school that has been recruiting him on the offensive line. though Blake Baker has been by his school. I think that they would be open to allowing him to play defensive line if that was something that he was interested in doing. But I think LSU is kind of having an uphill climb right now in his recruitment. Yeah, he's been there more than any other school over the course of his recruitment. But I think the Aggies have kind of emerged as the team to beat. I think that's been a theme that started to brew over the summer, and I think not only was he there when Texas A&M beat LSU in College Station, he was back a month later for another. I think it was a Texas game potentially, and it seemed like maybe commitment was on his mind. Now Lamar is not going to make a decision until signing day as of right now. Texas A&M is going to get 2 visits from him in March and then April, and probably an official visit. Alabama scheduled their official visit with him in May. Oregon and Tennessee are also trying to get official visits from Lamar. This is a big weekend for LSU. I think this weekend, I don't know if it's Blake Baker or Joe Sloan or Brian Kelly or some combination of the three. But if LSU is going to stay in this race, it starts this weekend because the last few visits to LSU have not been needle movers for Lamar Brown, the state's #1 player right now. A&M has the momentum, and these other schools are ahead of LSU in scheduling official visits. Some schools like Alabama that have never had Lamar Brown on campus already getting an official visit. LSU has not scheduled that. This weekend will be the big catalyst, in my opinion. And if LSU doesn't make a move, I'm imagining the out-of-state wins are going to start blowing a little bit harder.
And if the positioning dynamic becomes a big factor for him, which I don't know ultimately where he lands with that, but he can catch the ball a little bit too. So if folks want to throw around, hey, we'll get you some tight end snaps in there if you want, come play D tackle. We'll have some packages in there where we'll get you in the end zone and just kind of cover some bases and kind of, fill that excitement level to kind of showcase what you can do. Maybe throw that out there, some program somewhere. Another guy, clearly on the LSU radar, a guy who's committed to LSU. We talked about the get of Kenny Darby from Airline last fall when he committed just a few months ago. He announced a couple of days ago that he's shutting his recruitment down. The extent of what that means in January in 2025, almost a year from signing day, we'll see how it all plays out because we can't take anything for granted at this point in recruiting. But Kenny Darby, coming off of an opportunity to chat with some LSU coaches, felt that much more strongly, that much more emboldened about his choice to be a part of this hometown program at the next level. I mean, how nice is that to just hear, whatever it means, that level of continued commitment right as Alabama's coming into the mix and other programs are starting to try to press for Kenny Darby for him to make an announcement like that?
Yeah, a little inside baseball. Kenny Darby had picked up the offer from Jamarcus Shepard last week. Coach Shepard, Alabama's wide receiver coach, had been heavily pressing behind the scenes for Darby since he committed to LSU. He was scheduled to be in Tuscaloosa last weekend and ended up not making that trip. Instead, shuts down his recruitment after visits from, I believe, Coach Sloan and potentially Coach Kelly, if I understand correctly. And not to take it right out of your mouth, but shutting down your recruitment in January is one thing, and then we'll see what happens when June official visits arrive. But I think it's a great step forward for LSU to kind of kick out the competition at this juncture. I think even after he committed to LSU, and I believe it was November, he was still picking up so much traction with coaches being back on the road and new offers coming in because. While we might have known about Kenny Darby all season, Alabama and Georgia and Tennessee certainly weren't paying attention to the Shreveport area prep scene as closely as we were. So I think for him to at least shut things down, feel comfortable, he'll be back at LSU this weekend, reconnecting with Coach Sloan and Coach Kelly and Coach Hankton. I think it does put the flip vibes at bay, at least, for the meanwhile. We'll see if he takes his official visits. I'm sure LSU will say, if you have an itch, go scratch it and then come back here and see how you feel. That would be the smart plan. But I think for now, it definitely quiets things up. LSU has a fantastic foundation in place for this 26 class, largely all in-state, between big, rich Anderson, Aiden Hall, the two receivers, Ja'Kai Anderson and Kenny Darby. It's a really solid. Jaraylen McCoy, who was an All-American, committed to LSU a couple of weeks ago at the Under Armour game. It's a really solid foundation that LSU has in place. And, this time a year ago, LSU had, Bryce Underwood and Harlan Berry and DeCorian Moore committed. This base may not have like all the 5 stars and the number ones at their position, but I think this is a more is equally a star-studded of base of a recruiting class that has a little bit more chances of everyone staying in place when it's time to sign in December.
I love this Louisiana 2026 class and some of the opportunity there for LSU for sure. We'll talk more about a lot of those guys next week. Also, a new commitment out of Louisiana's 26 class for Arkansas and Ari Slocum up there at Union Parish. We didn't get a chance to talk about him today, but we'll talk a little bit more about him next week. I've just got a time crunch to go run to some radio, but we're going to have an opportunity to talk about so many of these 2026 guys through the course of this year of Recruit Dat Boot. And so glad to get back into it. Again, he's Sam Spiegelman, and as always, appreciate his time. I'm Jarrett Roser for Louisiana vs. All Y'all's Recruit Dat Boot. Thanks, y'all, as always, for tuning in. See y'all next week.